5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
You're listening to Working Forward, presented by Symetra. In this limited podcast series, hosted by Todd Zen, we explore the future of work from a variety of viewpoints and discuss the challenges and opportunities ahead.
Hello and welcome to the Season 2 of the Working Forward podcast. I am Todd Zen, your host, and we are thrilled that you've joined us as we kick off this next season of our program. Some things are new for this year. So you may have noticed if you followed us last year that we had a lot of hosts. This year, I'll be serving as your primary host for the conversations. Now, I can tease that if we're lucky, I think we're going to be able to coax at least one or two of our past friends, our hosts, on to be guests. But for now, I'll be serving as your primary host. A couple other things that will be different and fun about Season 2. We're going to shoot for shorter episodes. We're going to try to keep the conversation a little bit more concise. We know everybody's time is valuable, and we've got some great information to share, but we'll be looking to come in a little shorter. One thing that's not changing is our broad theme. We are going to be talking about the future of work and all its various implications, but one thing that will be different about Season 2 is we want to zero in on employee benefits and employer benefits. These are things that are empowering the future of work, that are having significant impacts, and that is our sort of overarching theme for Season 2, where we're going to really dig into those type of topics. And without further ado, let me share with you our topic for today. Today we're going to be covering the future of absence management and state paid leave programs. We've got a great group of guests here to talk about this topic. I'm going to introduce them in just one moment, but just want to share, when you think about absence management and state leave, you have something that is very much impacting work, the future of work. It challenges for employers, challenges for employees. There's significant regulatory activity taking place. We'll be talking about that quite a bit. And I think these are programs of tremendous social value. We all agree that giving people time off, paid time off where possible, to take care of their own health, to take care of their family members is a important and valuable thing, but it also introduces massive complexity for employers, for, again, the employees themselves. So there is a ton to manage here, and there is a lot to unpack. So with that, let me bring in the guests that we have here today to help us with this big, broad, and very important topic. So our first guest joins us from Symetra. I'm excited to introduce Kayla Halpin. Kayla is Symetra's VP of Absence and Disability Strategy. She is about the most knowledgeable person I know about this topic, so I know she is going to have a lot of wonderful things to share. Kayla, hello, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Todd. Happy to be here.
And next, we have another guest from Symetra, Leah Einen. Leah is the Director of Paid Family Medical Leave Products. I am honored to have Kayla on my product team. She does a fantastic job managing the massive complexity associated with these very important state laws. So, Leah, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Todd.
And we certainly wouldn't be complete in our conversation without some outside expertise. So we are very, very fortunate to have Sydney Shorten joining us. Sydney is the founder and CEO of ADA Program Solutions, and her company is doing very impressive and interesting work in this space. Sydney, hello, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Todd.
All right, I am going to get us started, but then I'm mostly going to stay out of the way because the three folks we've invited here have a lot of great information. But Kayla, let me start and ask you a very broad overarching question. So what is absence management, right? Obviously, it's, managing absence, but it's bigger than that, right? There's a lot of complexities here. So, when you explain absence management and the importance of it, how do you do so? And if you could highlight too, what are some of the biggest challenges that employers and employees face when they have to manage absences and all sorts of other complexities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, absence management as it exists in the US particularly is a patchwork of federal, state, municipal, and company leave, laws and policies that, allow people to take varying degrees of leave, either on an unpaid or paid basis when, they're experiencing a major life event or a challenge, whether it's their own serious health condition, caring for a family member with one, going through pregnancy and childbirth or bonding with a new baby, whether that's through adoption, foster care, or biological birth. And so, I think with the pandemic and remote work, there's been an increasing focus on employees as whole people and a little bit less of that siloing a work persona from their personal life. And in my mind, that's actually just highlighted the need for leave more because we're not just robots producing widgets. We're human beings that are going through things in our own personal lives that sometimes require us optimally to take time away from work. In terms of challenges for employers, as I mentioned, it's a patchwork today, right? So, on the one hand, we're one of the only developed countries in the world that doesn't have federally mandated paid leave. We do have the FMLA, which is a federally mandated unpaid leave, but again, it only applies to a certain subset of employers and employees based on eligibility. But then we have all of these states who are coming in trying to mandate paid benefits, under the state. But we're up to, Leah probably knows the count right off the top of her head, but I think it's around 14-ish, that have either enacted or are planning to enact state paid leaves. But then that still leaves, 2/3 of the country with no federal mandated paid leave and no state mandated paid leave. So then you have employers that are trying to manage compliance and administration of that patchwork while also trying to fill the gaps in that coverage and benefits for employees who happen not to work in one of those states where it's mandated. So that becomes a pretty big challenge for employers. And then as an employee, you're navigating trying to understand what's even available to you. Can you afford to take leave? I think that's a huge one. Is there's a lot of people who truly need leave, but who can't afford to take it because it is unpaid or they're going to have to exhaust, their PTO or sick time in order to do it. So I think that that's also really challenging as well. So it's a complicated landscape for employers, for employees, and even for administrators as well.
Excellent. Thank you. No, that makes a ton of sense. And what I want to dig into right away is actually something you referenced about the patchwork quilt and the legislative environment. There's been significant shifts and new laws and all sorts of things happening. PWFA, PFML. It's sort of an alphabet soup of absence laws and whatnot. Maybe Leah, you can comment on this because it's so close to what you do in paid family medical leave. Could you talk a little bit about the regulatory environment and some of the significant impacts that paid family medical leave laws are having on absence programs overall?
Sure. I mean, I think everybody's seeing what's going on across the entire country, and it seems like every state, to a certain degree, is looking at some type of solution, whether it be what's called the NCOIL model, which is kind of like a family short-term disability plan, essentially, what we traditionally see as a short-term disability plan, but for family members, or an actual state-enacted paid leave. We're seeing all sorts of things pop up, but I think what makes it especially challenging for both employers and employees is that it doesn't seem like they put down the pencil. There's always changes that are coming. And so to not just stay on top of the new states that are enacting laws and have passed laws and you have to comply with those laws, but it's also keeping track of the existing states that have already gone into place and ensuring compliance with all the rules that they're changing. Like Colorado just came out with a whole host of fines that are mostly on the employer side. And I don't know how many employers are aware of that Colorado came out with that and what those fines really mean for the employer. And so staying on top of that, especially to Kayla's point earlier of the remote work environment where employees are moving from state to state, tracking those changes that are enacted in those existing states it's a full-time job. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges from an employer standpoint, but same with employees too. You move into a state and you may not even realize that the PFML fees are coming out of your paycheck, and all of a sudden you look down and, oh goodness, I'm eligible for PFML. I wish I would have known that, 6 months ago when I broke my leg. So there's things like that that I think are occurring that make it especially challenging for employers to help their employees through those situations, and then also manage the compliance side of it as well. Kayla,
Well, I
Sydney,
think
anything from your perspective?
Well, I was going to ask Sydney because, we have all these federal state leave laws, but then we have these accommodation laws on top of it, right? ADA, PWFA, the Pump Act. And so now you're layering leave as an accommodation or other types of accommodations on top of the federal and state. So I was just curious, Sydney, what are some of the challenges you're seeing in the accommodation space, when it comes to both employees and employers?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So a lot of the same challenges when it comes to the employer and employees. One is that depending on the employer, if they're operating in multiple states, I find there's more challenges with those employers trying to make sure that they're having flexibility and adaptable policies that account for the varying personal circumstances and maybe less traditional work environments, such as the remote work. But I also see that it's very difficult for monitoring employee availability and ensuring fair and consistent application of leave policies across the different locations. A lot of times, the employees may not be aware, like Leah mentioned, that they even have a benefit that's available to them. And then with the interplay of ADA, a lot of times employers, depending on their size, they may not know that they have additional requirements such as the ADA to adhere to as well. And so it makes it very challenging for both the employee and the employer in those circumstances.
I think what we're seeing a lot of is leave planning tools, because it is such a patchwork that becomes much more critical to ensure that your employees do know what they're eligible for, especially if there's municipality leaves that are included, and all of, this kind of patchwork, I think, is the common term that everybody's using. But it seems to be that that's one of the more, the newer items that is coming to the forefront for employers in their toolkit to use, that I've seen pop up over the last couple of years. That wasn't in existence, even 4 or 5 years ago. Seems to be more prevalent now.
All right, so let's talk about one of my favorite words that we cover a lot on this podcast, and that's innovation. So my guess is that this world of absence is ripe for innovation and disruption and a lot of positive movement. I imagine technology probably plays a role here too. So, Sydney, maybe we can start with you. I'm really interested in your perspective. And I also wanted to ask you too when I introduced you, and I forgot, would love to hear a little bit more about your company as well. So the type of services that ADA Program Solutions provide and what you do. I feel like maybe it wraps around this question a bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So ADA Program Solutions, we're a boutique consulting firm that specializes in helping businesses with ADA compliance and the interplay of employee benefits, such as disability plans and absence management. Our team is passionate about ensuring individuals with disabilities have equal opportunities in the workplace, and one of those is accessibility. So as we speak about the innovation and technology, making sure that employers have solutions for those individuals that need additional assistance to do their job, either with or without accommodations. It's very important.
Kayla, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah.
Well, obviously digital leave planning tools is a big piece of it. I think what we're seeing a lot of too is integrations between HRIS and Ben admin platforms, and then whatever platform may be doing the leave management. So it could be with a carrier like Symetra, or it could be, an internal kind of software as a service solution that an employer might be leveraging. So there's a desire to move away from the manual transfer of data that has kind of been the
Yes.
hallmark of the industry for so long of, you get this daily report or this weekly report, and then you manually update your payroll and your, all your platforms. So there's definitely in the industry been a pretty significant shift toward trying to automate these data exchanges between these two systems to, one, alleviate the burden on, the HR team who would have typically been manually transferring this data, and B, to also reduce errors, right? When you're manually transferring data between systems, there's an increased opportunity for mistakes to be made. We're also seeing increased, just interest and presence of AI in general, in the world and in the industry. I know there's some trepidation there. There's some excitement. There's some trepidation. I think that's also kind of how I feel about it, which is I think AI has a lot of great practical use cases, but there are going to be limits, I think, of what AI can do. And one of the things as I think about the future of work is I suspect, in my non-expert on tech opinion, that there's going to be a pretty significant shift toward AI and automation and relying really heavily on that. And then I suspect there's going to be a slight swing backwards to having human being. I think we're going to stretch the limits of what AI can do. We're going to realize where we've gone past what it really should do. And then there's going to be a correction back to bringing live human beings, back into the process. And I think that's really important because, at Symetra, for instance, when we file a claim, employees have the option to call us and talk to a live person, or they can just go on to our digital portal platform and do all of it, without needing to talk to a single person. But we still see, 70 to 80% of our claims coming in telephonically. So as tech focused as everyone is, we still see that a lot of times, people who are filing a claim, going out on claim, have questions about a claim, they actually do want to talk to a live human being. And there are limits to what a digital leave planning tool or a chat bot, is able to offer someone in that circumstance.
And I think that's partially prompted by the fact that there is that patchwork of leave available to people. They just don't understand it. I mean, we live in this world day in and day out. Employees don't. And majority of HR people don't either. I mean, unless that's exclusively their job. They have, benefits that they're having to run and ensure that, it's financially sound. Unless you have a dedicated person in HR, they're likely not up to speed on what's all available. And so that patchwork, back to the AI thing, I'm excited about AI. I think it's going to change how HR does their work significantly, just from a predictive modeling standpoint, being able to, if you're an employer that doesn't have flexible work arrangements or can't, let's say it's a manufacturing firm or something like that, that predictive modeling to be able to tell when perhaps are we going to see an influx of leaves, and how can we proactively plan for that and train our managers and ensure that they're up to speed, and kind of point your resources at the right areas versus right now it's just, okay, everybody in the company is going to get trained. Instead, let's try to focus it in the right avenues. I think that's where AI is going to come into in a big way for HR, which is really exciting because that's not been really in existence. You just had to throw bodies at, everybody across the company. Instead, I think AI is really going to plug in ways that we probably have never seen. But Kayla, I totally agree. I think we're going to swing one way and then it's going to come back. But I also think AI is going to free up those resources that would have perhaps spent their time in another way to use it and utilize it differently and more creatively or more consultatively. And so we're going to see a shift in the entire work environment as well, which is really exciting for me. So I'm looking forward to the next few years with AI. It'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Leah, I would have to say that I agree with both you and Kayla on the analysis when it comes to AI and the future of the workplace. I believe it will shift one way and then come back because AI is only as good as the individuals who are programming it. So I think using it more as a tool and to be more efficient or creative in somebody's job role is definitely going to be beneficial, but to rely on it for all the complexities of the leave law landscape and helping employees. I really think, individuals appreciate that human element, and that's being able to speak to a live person. Because again, a chat bot can only get you so far. They're only geared to certain questions and certain responses. So you're really limited on trying to maybe get to the right department or individual to help you with something. And so I think when it comes to the AI, it's a great tool and resource, but ultimately at the end of the day, that human element is really going to make the difference.
Great. Well, I'm really glad we're talking about AI because we talked about it a lot in season 1, and I want to bring up another topic we also talked a lot about in season 1, and Kayla actually referenced it already, and I'm really interested in how the applicability and how much complexity this raises for absence management, and that's remote work. As remote work has proliferated, maybe it's pulling back in some sectors, but it certainly still exists. I'm interested in all of your take on, how does remote work add complexity to this conversation? I know, Leah, on your end, there's state paid leave implications as well that gets interesting. So can anybody who'd like to start talk a little bit about remote work and what complexity it brings to absence management?
I have just a short little statement to comment on that. I would think that remote work presents unique challenges for the state paid leave programs, such as difficulties in monitoring employee availability and also ensuring fair and consistent application of those leave policies, as I mentioned, across the different locations previously. So there are challenges when it comes to remote work.
Definitely. I think one of the ones that we've seen pop up just recently with New York, New York just implemented a rule where you couldn't retroactively apply coverage, and it goes into effect in August this year. But you can't. I'm not saying you can't. You can. It's just that will be fined if someone needs to retroactively apply their coverage for New York. That brought a point that I think we've kind of been debating over the last couple of years is when an employee moves from a state to state. So that may be caught from a payroll perspective for taxes. You move from, Washington to Oregon, your taxes look differently, but your PFML also looks differently too. And what requirements does an employer have to enroll that employee in that state plan or a carrier plan at that time? And is that being accounted for? Because a lot of times payroll is held within finance and HR is housed in a different division. And so what are those kind of feedback loops that HR is establishing to ensure that they're catching all of the requirements? And especially if an employee is moving into a state where you've never had that particular PFML program before, your HR folks probably don't know anything about it. So how do you get them quickly up to speed about what that PFML program looks like, or municipality leaves too? I mean, it's the whole gamut. So ensuring that there are those feedback loops, I think, is one of the struggles that employers are having right now with the remote work. And so we'll see how that shapes up. But that's one that is definitely being called into the limelight here in this year, 2025. Kayla, what about you?
And there's been some positive shifts that are still challenging in their own way. And obviously, we see some high profile companies who are doing mandated return to office, right now that are making headlines. So there's definitely, employers that are, kind of going back to the pre-COVID approach, to hybrid or remote work. But I think one of the shifts is it's helped nudge employers more toward focusing on outcomes when it comes to work and less on how many hours did you work, right? It's more about outcomes and productivity. Like, what did you accomplish? If you can accomplish everything you need to in 38 hours instead of 40, so I think that's beneficial, from that perspective. Remote work obviously allows people to have, more flexible schedules, which then means you actually need less time for leave, right? Like if I'm at home and I need to go pick up my kid from school that's 5 minutes down the street, if I had been mandated to go into an office, maybe I would have had to take a half day that day. Or, if I have a doctor's appointment that I can run out and come back to. So it's definitely reduce the need for traditional leave for things like childcare, doctor's appointment, minor stuff, because you're working from home, so you can kind of just float between the personal and the professional without having to have this hard line of I'm at work and I'm working, or I'm at home and I'm doing something that's personal in nature. And obviously, it's also eliminating commuting stress. Like, I live in the Chicagoland area, and it's, thank God I work from home, but a lot of people commute an hour plus each way, whether they're coming from the suburbs to the city or they're doing the reverse commute, vice versa. And even my husband does that, and he's spending an hour plus each way every day he goes into the office. That's 2 hours of lost productivity, of basically stress, especially if you're driving through rush hour traffic. So the reduction in commuting stress and actually freeing up people to have more time to do work that they're not now wasting on a commute that they would have, done traditionally. So I think all of those things contribute toward not as obvious or primary impacts to absence management, but they're factors that are underpinning, how and when employees take leave from work.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, because the return to office mandates, they can significantly impact the frequency of leave and accommodation requests. As you mentioned, Kayla, additionally, employees who have adapted to remote work may find the transition back to that traditional office setting challenging, resulting in that increased stress level or potential burnout. This could also lead to more frequent requests for mental health days or that flexible scheduling. So I think it's important that employers remain attentive to the needs and foster that supportive work environment for their employees as well.
Totally agree. Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we get to two more topics. And this next one I find very, very interesting in the world of leave management, because it's complex on the front end, but it's also complex on the back end as well, right? It's not a challenge just to coordinate the leave. It's a challenge to integrate the employee back to work and get them back to work as quickly as possible. We know it's in the employer's best interest. It's also most often in the employee's best interest, right? There's health benefits to working. There's health benefits to belonging and being a part of something. So I'm really interested in all of your thoughts on kind of return to work strategies, how employers can ensure a successful return to work, one that is respectful of the well-being of the employee too, which is of course paramount. So would love to get some thoughts on return to work. Maybe Sydney, you could start.
Yeah, absolutely. So remote work and returning back to work, I think it definitely impacts the employer's approach to maybe accommodations or support for that mental health or that family-related leave, as the nature of the remote working may have already provided that degree of flexibility that Caleb mentioned. However, the flexibility does not replace the need for those formal leave policies and support systems. Communication is going to be crucial in setting those expectations with the employee so that they understand what does that process look like. Also, additional training and education for managers, frontline supervisors, as a lot of times they're the ones who will be the first ones to assist with that employee getting back to work, making sure that they're set up to continue their job as well.
I also think another additional thing is having regular check-ins with the employee when they return to work to ensure if there are accommodations that have been made, that if they're not working as intended, you can adjust kind of real time instead of waiting for a prolonged period of time and the accommodation's not working. Also, bring in kind of the PFML perspective. One of the huge benefits of PFML for the employees is that ability to take that time that they desperately need and then have that financial burden removed during that time, or at least partially removed during that time, and being able to return to work, more focused and more productive as an employee because they were able to take the time that they needed and not have to get back to work soon because I need to make my mortgage or I've got bills to pay. And so I need to get back 2 weeks earlier than when I actually should be. Some of that plays into it too. And so I think that the comprehensive, Sydney, you touched on the communications, those proactive communications, even as the employee's filing their leave, talking about, okay, when you're all, when everything's all done and you're ready to come back, this is what that process is going to look like. And here's the support you're going to receive, and ensuring that they feel like, okay, I have a place to come back. My paycheck's been taken care of while I'm out. Now I'm able to return and be my whole self at work, or, I'm here, I'm ready to go. Let's get back to work. And so I think there's a lot of factors that play into it. But Kayla, I know this is kind of also your baby, the return to work area. So what have you got to say on this one?
Well, I think you hit on something important, which is I sometimes see employers being hesitant to try out accommodations because they feel like if they approve them and implement them, now they're like committed forever to honoring this accommodation, when in fact, agreeing to an accommodation that will allow someone to return to work on a trial basis, even if you're not totally sure, will this work for business? Will this work for the employee? As long as you're clear in your communications with the employee that you are implementing this accommodation on a trial basis, you're going to reassess, how it's working for both you as the business and them as an employee, after X amount of time. Like the EEOC is not going to fault you for having tried to make an accommodation for the employee if ultimately in the end it either isn't effective for the employee or it isn't reasonable for business. So I think that's something that, more employers should get comfortable with. I'm not totally sure if this is work, but let's at least try it on a trial basis and be clear about that communication, and then reassess to see if this is something, that can be effective for us. The other thing is I saw some research on this the other day, and it talks about the impact of an employee who's on leave on the rest of their team who has to cover for them. And I think managers who experience high rates of leaves on their teams probably somewhat know this innately, but for the employees who are left behind covering for someone who is on leave, it has a pretty significant effect on them. So like some of the findings showed that 13% of employees who were covering for someone else on leave experienced a drop in their mental health. 42% experienced burnout when the person who they were covering for, whose leave exceeded 9 weeks. A lot of the employees who were covering from someone else either experienced a new health condition that may have required them to seek treatment or take leave themselves, or it may have exacerbated an existing condition that they had. So that's obviously, we don't want to tell people they can't take leave because it's going to adversely impact their team. But at the same time, I think it's helpful to understand that there can be this kind of compounding or amplifying effect when you do have these policies and you do allow people to take leave, but thinking more about how do you also care and support the team who's left behind and is now burdened with covering for that person's work, to ensure you don't kind of have this compounding, amplifying effect where one person's leave then turns into 2 more people's leave, which then, makes the burnout and the stress worse for everybody else. And that's something I haven't seen as much attention paid to, but it's hopefully something that, HR teams, employers, carriers can shift the perspective to, which is not just how do we support the person who's going out on leave, but how do we support the employees who are still working, who are picking up the slack for the people who are out, without breeding a lot of resentment or now having them need to take their own leaves as a result of covering for their coworker. So
Yeah, excellent points. So I want to leave everybody with, or not leave, I want to ask everyone a final question. And maybe because this is the first episode of season 2, I'm nostalgic for season 1, but a little bit of a throwback. Our very first episode was with a futurist, and he talked to us broadly about what work might feel like in 2035 on all sorts of levels. And it was a really interesting conversation. I'm not going to ask you to be futurist per se, but I am going to ask you to look into the future. It is the Working Forward podcast. And I want to talk to you about what you think this next decade will bring in absence management, and what trends we think we're going to see, and where we think we'll end up. And I am selfishly going to ask Leah this question first because it impacts our product pipeline. So,
It does.
but I really would love to get each of your take, maybe starting with Leah, going to Kayla, and finishing with Sydney. What are some of the big trends we expect to see over the next 10 years? Do we think we're going to still see a patchwork quilt? I think, Leah, especially for you, of states enacting paid family medical leave, or perhaps a federal solution, or where are we going to go with PFML? And I think Kayla and Sydney more broadly, where we think absence will take us.
Sure. So PFML, it's not slowing down. We'll continue to see states enact their own. Even if the feds come in and enact a Fed law, it won't be to the robust nature that a lot of the states that we've seen, at least from the proposals that have gone to the Fed level thus far. There are 2 laws right now being proposed at the federal level to try to align some of the state administrative pieces and supply some federal grant money if the states opt into that. Whether or not that's going to move forward, we'll see. But I think there is recognition, and there's a lot of working employer groups that are trying to push for some kind of alignment across the states because it is becoming very unwieldy for many to manage these. From a PFML standpoint, I think we're going to continue to see some additional benefits that'll go out with PFML. So as the plan designs are produced by the various states, we'll see different things being brought into that PFML landscape. So I don't think the complexity necessarily is going to change significantly. I think it's actually going to increase because it seems like each state brings in something a little bit extra into their state laws. So I think that's just going to be the trend in how it moves forward. Technology, I think, is going to become a really big player in the next 10 years. Companies are just frankly going to have to rely more and more on using technological tools to administer their leaves, whether they do it in-house or they outsource. They're going to have to rely on their tech partners to ensure that the leaves are compliant. So I think we'll see that. One other thing that hasn't really come up in PFML in a big way yet, and I think it probably will in the next 10 years, is a focus on mental health, like a specific focus on mental health. I think in wellness programs and support for employees as they return to work, and even to Kayla's point, support for employees that are still in the workplace, how do we ensure that their mental health is taken care of? So I think you're going to see a shift there as well and start seeing more being brought into the legislation and the laws as they're being written. That's my prediction in my futuristic viewpoint. Yeah, I think it's going to, that's why I like PFML, because it's fun, it's ever changing, and it's constantly shifting. And but we'll see. So 10 years from now, Todd, let's review this again and see if I was right on my
We'll check and see if you were right. Kayla, I think you probably will be. Kayla, what do you think?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have a lot to add. Mental health was definitely top of mind, where I think continuing to focus over the next 10 years on reducing the stigma of mental health struggles, of hopefully better equipping employers to understand how they can support and accommodate employees that are struggling with mental health. Because I know, I'll be curious if Sydney agrees in her practice, but like a lot of employers struggle with knowing how to make an accommodation for mental health because there isn't, an objective restriction like can't lift more than 20 pounds. When it comes to mental health, the ways that you can effectively accommodate and support an employee who's struggling are not as obvious. It may be if someone's prone to panic attacks, they have a dark, quiet room they can go to when they feel one coming on. But, those are not necessarily like tip of the tongue, top of mind, accommodations for many employers. I also think that there is hopefully going to be increased focus and support on caregivers, whether it's sandwich generation, who are both simultaneously caring for the elderly as well as caring for children. We know that caregiving especially is disproportionately a burden women face in the workplace. I know in COVID, lots of women left the workforce because they assumed the primary caregiving responsibilities for children and for for older family members, and we know that that can also lead to burnout, to leaves on their own. So I'm seeing more care and thought being put toward caregivers who are also trying to work. And so my hope is, in addition to the mental health support and focus, there's also an increased focus on supporting employees who are caregiving for others.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Leah and Kayla, y'all both summed it up very well. I too believe that in the future, trends like the increase in importance of mental health leave, the caregiver leave, and the rise of flexible working arrangements will likely shape the ongoing absence management space. Also, absence management professionals may see their roles evolve towards more of a strategic position, focusing on designing those comprehensive benefit programs and leveraging that data analytics to ensure employees' well-being. So definitely a focus on making sure those employees are taken care of.
Wonderful. Well, I can't think of a better note to wrap things up on. So I want to thank our guests, Leah and Kayla, for sharing your great insights. You are tremendous colleagues and great experts in this space. And Sydney as well, thank you for joining us from outside Symetra and talking a bit about your company and the great services you provide and sharing your expertise as well. So that is a wrap for episode 1 of season 2. Please stay with us. We've got a lot of great content coming your way. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button, and we will be back speaking to you very soon. Thank you for joining us.
You're listening to Working Forward, Future of Work podcast series. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Symetra Life Insurance Company or its affiliates. The host is not affiliated with Symetra Life Insurance Company and/or any of its affiliates and is solely responsible for the content.